On July 22, 2011, the largest terrorist attack in the history of Northern Europe occurred in Oslo, the capital of Norway. In fact, there is only one terrorist, named Anders Breivik, who is a member of an extreme right-wing organization in Norway. This guy made careful organization and planning. He first selected the most crowded area, and placed a powerful car bomb on the street near the Prime Minister's office in the city center. With a huge explosion, 9 people were killed on the spot. More than 30 people were injured, and the scene was a mess. Afterwards, Breivik calmly left the scene and took a boat to the nearby island of Utøya, where a youth summer camp is being held on Utøya Island, with a total of 700 young people aged 14 to 18. After Breivik arrived on the island of Utøya, he went on a killing spree, using the automatic rifle he carried with him to kill anyone he saw. He continued to slaughter for nearly 2 hours, killing 68 people and wounding 66 people. In other words, during the entire day of July 22, Breivik killed 77 people and wounded 96 people. The police didn't rush over until Breivik's hands were softened. Seeing the police, Breivik threw his gun away. "I surrender." After being arrested by the police, Breivik confessed to his crimes, but did not admit his guilt. "I did murder, but I am not guilty." Subsequently, Breivik's lawyer arrived and presented a plea of not guilty, arguing that Breivik should be acquitted. The reason was that Breivik was mentally ill. Of course, under Norwegian law, if this proved to be the case, Breivik would be released immediately. No shit. As a result, Breivik saw what the lawyer said, and became furious, saying that "you are crazy, and your whole family is crazy. I am very sane, I just killed someone, but I want to defend my innocence." So, Breivik stated his reasons for killing. "Everything I do is for Europe. Norway has changed. Europe has changed. There are too many those damn immigrants have to get out of Norway before it gets worse. All I do is for Norway, for Europe." The judge said that your murder has nothing to do with immigration, and what you killed was not an immigrant. Breivik said that "I asked the government not to immigrate and the government would not listen. The Norwegian government has messed up the whole of Europe. In order to attract the attention of the government, I had to kill people." The judge said "fuck me." Breivik gave a Nazi salute on the spot, saying that "everything I did was for the Norwegian people." Of course, this statement of Breivik was not accepted by the court, so he was sentenced by the Norwegian court to the highest death penalty in Norway, which is 21 years in prison. Yes, you read that right, 21 years, the highest penalty in Norway. Not to mention that Breivik killed 77 people. Even if he killed 5 million people in Norway, he can only be sentenced to 21 years in prison, because there is no higher penalty than this. But, do you think Breivik needs to spend 21 years in a cell with harsh conditions? Certainly not. The Norwegian government said, "We pay great attention to human rights. As long as Breivik stays in the cell for 7 years, he can get out of prison every weekend for the weekend, spend whatever time he wants, and return to the prison on Monday to report. And within 14 years, as long as he has not committed another crime, he can be released on parole, and nothing will happen." This is human rights in Norway. Killed 77 people and served 14 years in prison. Of course, you may ask, why not the death penalty? What about the dead? What about the people Breivik killed? The Norwegian government said "you are stupid, even if we kill Breivik, can those 77 people be resurrected? I can't be resurrected. Since we can't be resurrected, why should we kill one more person? Moreover, God has the right to take away human life." So, Breivik happily went to jail. Why do you say happy? Because the environment of the cell is so good. The environment of a normal chain hotel cannot be compared with the cell in Norway. The prison cells in Northern Europe are super 5-star standard. Part 2, 8-star national prisons in Northern Europe. Take Breivik as an example. He was imprisoned in Telemark prison, where he was assigned an exclusive 3-bedroom apartment with a bedroom, a fitness room, a study room, and a private bathroom. There are computers, TVs, 24-hour showers, large windows, air conditioning, heating. Note, the picture above is a real shot of Breivik's separate cell. Of course, if Breivik feels bored, he has 4 hours of relaxation time every day. There are also billiard rooms, libraries, cafes, and football fields in the prison system for prisoners to exercise. Don't think that Breivik has privileges. All criminals in Norway are treated this way. Of course, in fact, The prisoners in Telemark prison are not happy, because in Hardin prison, the prisoners have not invited fitness trainers, and the prisoners can also form a band, and there is a recording studio in the prison. Moreover, Breivik often complained about the lack of human rights in the prison, saying that he had to wear 3 pieces of clothes when it was coldest, so the prison gave him a typewriter and a box game console, because Breivik said that playing games on computers was not good. Seeing that Breivik played games every day and didn't want to make progress, the prison guard said, "Brother, you can't help but strive for progress." So, with the encouragement of the prison guard, he applied for a degree at the University of Oslo and studied political science online. The Norwegian government said, "Look how good our human rights are, we almost never have prison breaks." A Norwegian prison said, many prisoners cried when they left, saying they were reluctant to leave. However, Norway's prisons are still being complained at every turn, and many prisoners still say that they have no human rights. Therefore, the Norwegian government has been doing nothing. Since 2000, it has invited the world's most famous designers and invested 10 billion dinars, approximately equal to 240 billion UN, directly in place, 10 years of construction, and an 8-star national prison covering an area of 100 hectares, Halden Prison. More than 250 murder or rape felons are held here. The following is the real shot of the single cell and activity scenes in Halden Prison. If you have any questions, please go to Baidu Encyclopedia. The picture below shows the reading room of Halden Prison. The picture below shows the climbing wall of Halden Prison. At least 50 kinds of sports and entertainment are provided in the prison. Only the policewoman in the picture below acts as a coach, and all the characters in the other pictures are prisoners. The picture below shows the pottery room in Halden Prison, which provides at least 30 hobbies for prisoners to learn. There are churches, gyms, activity rooms, clinics, libraries, greenhouses, everything you need for life that you can think of or can't think of is here. When Halden Jail first opened, a British convict was one of the first guests. Here, she felt the unprecedented quality of service. After she returned home after serving her sentence, she praised the luxury and excellent service of Halden Prison in the newspaper, and finally said, "I can't find any language to describe it, so I can only rate it with 7 stars to show its difference." Since then, this free advertisement has spread throughout the world. The prison environment in Norway is so good. Do the families of the victims have any objections? For example, Breivik killed 77 people and checked all the information. I didn't see any complaints from the families of the victims. Just like the nearly 600,000 people who died from the epidemic in the United States, the family members are still Trump fans. Because people are dead, can they still be brought back to life? The family member said proudly, "How good is the human rights in our country?" Of course, what we are talking about here is only the prison environment in Norway, and the whole of Northern Europe is full of sauces. There is absolutely no death penalty. Of course, there is no death penalty in almost the whole of Western Europe. For example, in the appalling case in Germany, Sebastian and Xenia sexually assaulted and killed more than 20 women, dismembered their corpses and other serious crimes, and they were only imprisoned for 500 years. But the standard of luxury prisons in Northern Europe is uniform. For example, Sollentuna, a national prison in Sweden, takes freedom and democracy as its mission. Every prisoner has a comfortable room and a personal bathroom. In addition to going to the gym, they can go to the kitchen to start a business. You can watch TV on the sofa. But just in case, surveillance cameras are installed in every part of the prison. The picture below shows the Sollentuna prisoner activity room. Therefore, the efforts of the Nordic countries finally paid off, just like the Norwegian prison guard proudly said, "Our prisoners here are reluctant to leave." The third part, the efforts of Northern Europe finally paid off. Sweden, terrorist attacks and rapes continue. The rape power in the world today has always been contested by India and the United States, but since 2010, Sweden, representing the Nordic countries, has finally become the global rape power. On January 13, 2007, tens of thousands of Facebook users witnessed an online crime live broadcast. In Uppsala, Sweden, 3 men live-streamed how they gang-raped a Swedish girl. At first, netizens thought it was a staged prank, but soon realized that something was wrong. The 3 men forcibly stripped the clothes and then raped her in a live broadcast that lasted 3 hours. What makes people angry is that during the violence, the 3 criminals still smiled brightly. Finally, the police came to arrest the 3 criminals and sent them to a luxurious star prison. The 3 men laughed from ear to ear, "Let's go to prison." This is just a relatively representative event in Sweden. In the past 10 years, the reported rape cases in Sweden are 3 to 4 times the average of 35 European countries, and the capital Stockholm has been dubbed the rape capital of Europe. In 2014, the Swedish police received 6,700 rape reports, equivalent to 69 rape cases per 100,000 population, an increase of 11% over the previous year. Because now all the refugees in the Middle East know, being able to go to prison in a Nordic country like Sweden is smoke from the ancestral grave. As a result, Sweden not only has frequent rape cases, but also all kinds of criminal records. 2010 representative, Stockholm terrorist attack, suicide bombing. 2017 representative, Stockholm truck crash crowd incident. Since 2018, there is no way to count. There were 162 explosions that year. At the peak, in October 2019, 3 bombings occurred in one night in Stockholm. Well, the reason is that there are too many refugees from the Middle East and other regions. Although the Swedes do not discriminate against refugees, the Swedish government is still worried that the refugees are sensitive and have thoughts, so for political reasons, the criminal identities of many refugees are covered up. That is to say, after the refugees committed rape and terrorist attacks in Sweden, they lived in 5-star in a high-level prison. After being released from prison, the identity is not allowed to be disclosed. Refugees who commit crimes are not only not disclosed their identities, their names are not disclosed, and their photos are all coded, because human rights must be safeguarded and racial discrimination cannot be allowed. These naturally make the refugees feel confident. The crime rate in Sweden is rising, but does the Swedish government remember it? It's no wonder it's long. In March 2019, there were 11 bombings caused by refugees in Sweden, but only from January to March, Sweden issued a total of 25,589 green cards, 8,549 were refugee reunion green cards, and 4,685 were new refugees. While terrorist attacks continue, people are constantly being let in. Are we saying that Sweden is not a democratic government? Why not control refugees? Because Sweden is a country that pursues correctness, the so-called human rights and freedom are above all else, and the inability to discriminate against immigrants is regarded as a natural morality that no one can surpass. For Sweden, 69 people were raped for every 100,000 people, and 99,931 people were not raped. Moreover, for the 69 people who were raped, they have already been raped. Could it be possible to change history by not allowing refugees to come over at this time? 99,931 of them feel the same way, okay. Of course, if you want to say that the Swedish government doesn't think about this matter at all, that's impossible, but the Swedish government can't restrict immigration. Yes, it can't. You read that right. Part 4, why the Nordic countries are powerless to deal with refugees, which is the deep-seated reason. Because Sweden is a multi-party country, a large number of parties with various names form the Swedish government. The Social Democratic Party is the largest party, and their support rate is the highest, 28%. Others are Sweden Democrats support rate 17.53%. Moderate Coalition Party support rate 8%. Only 8% or more than 10 parties are united together. Environmental Party support rate 4.41%. Others include the Central Party, the People's Party, the Liberal Party, and the Christian Democrats, which add up to about 40.26%. The entire government is full of parties and chaos. The parties in Sweden are in a mess, and there is also the third largest party, the Pirate Party, also known as the Internet Piracy Party by the people. There are so many parties that it is impossible to understand. Since the new Swedish government began to consider boycotting refugees in 2018, the various parties quarreled every day, and the talks collapsed every time. The efficiency was astonishingly low. The discussion took place for 2 full years. Countless Swedes were raped during the 2 years, but the various parties still can't reach an agreement. Everyone even discussed, should we boycott refugees? Is it not our political correctness to oppose discrimination? Therefore, after 2 years of policy research, on July 20th this year, Sweden finally introduced a new bill to amend the original refugee reception bill, specifically. Refugees can still come to Sweden, but the conditions are higher than before. For example, family members of refugees can come to Sweden to visit relatives and settle down unconditionally. Now, refugees from Sweden must prove that they have the ability to support themselves before they can invite their family members to settle in Sweden. Specifically, if a refugee earns 5,016 crowns a month, his family members can come to Sweden to reunite with him. That is, if you are a Syrian refugee, you find a job in Sweden and get a salary equivalent to RMB 3,756 a month, you can apply to invite family members from Syria to join you in Sweden. Of course, refugees can also do without a job, that is, they can provide proof of their own savings to prove that they have savings. In short, Sweden has various considerations for the refugees, for fear of offending the refugees. Of course, as soon as this plan was introduced, the refugees in Sweden had great opinions, because before that, as long as a refugee has the right to live permanently in Sweden, his whole family can come here. Now we still need our income certificate? What do you mean? Are you not racist? Hey, all in all, come on, Sweden continues to welcome everyone with open arms. In the future, there will be more and more refugees in Sweden, and all parties in Sweden will inevitably please Middle East refugees to canvass for themselves in the future. In the same way, all political parties involved in the discussion in Sweden are thinking about their own political correctness, and will not consider that Swedes are being raped by refugees. Part B. Why do Nordics sympathize with refugees but discriminate against Chinese? Do you know the reason? Finally, what I want to say is that Sweden, a 2B country, is really different from the United States. It does this, and would rather be raped by refugees than welcome refugees. Of course, when we wrote about Sweden last time, many people asked, why does Sweden really value equality and treat black millet and Arab brothers more than their own fathers? Why does it discriminate against Chinese people? Spread rumors about China on various occasions. Do you know what? Maslow's theory can still be studied. The greatest satisfaction of people is the sense of social identity. This sense of social identity means that they have a strong sense of superiority in Sweden. When Sweden went to pity the Black Corn and the Arab brothers, they had a strong sense of superiority and pride in their hearts. Although they were raped, they were very satisfied deep in their hearts and felt that they had given alms to the inferior people. When people help the weak, they often have a strong sense of satisfaction in their hearts. But, therefore, the entire Western world will always have pity on the black sorghum, but they have no right to view China in this way. Political correctness in the West has always been to sympathize with the weak, slander the strong, kneel and lick the king. What does China belong to? A country that both Biden and Trump fear from the bottom of their hearts, is on the way from the strong to the king. A mighty nation that has navigated the globe for 80% of its history. A strong economy that has accumulated a lot of money and quickly killed the Swedish manufacturing. A nation that must in the future far surpass Sweden and keep them beyond their reach. The West cannot sympathize with such a country, and no one is qualified to use the word sympathy. Therefore, we must have a clear understanding that in the next 14 years, the entire Western world will intensify its efforts to slander, spread rumors, and smear China. China is also the only country they can still discriminate against. But they only have the last 14 years, because after our long-term goal is achieved in 2035, we will become the real kings. When the situation in the South China Sea was unstable, Putin sent people to visit Vietnam. It seems that under the background of the Look East strategy, Russia will no longer let China fight alone in the South China Sea, and the stability of the South China Sea will add new strength. According to the news reports, Russian Federal Security Council Vice Chairman Dmitry Medvedev arrived in Hanoi for a 2-day official visit to Vietnam. At the same time, after Medvedev's visit, China sent naval forces to Vietnam for a friendly visit. It can be seen that China and Russia attach great importance to the situation in the South China Sea. Although the levels of visits are different and the routes are different, they have the same purpose, which is to stabilize the situation in the South China Sea. Maintaining peace and stability in the South China Sea is understood from China's standpoint. After all, the geographical location of the South China Sea is very important to my country's national security. So why is Russia suddenly so interested in the South China Sea? The reason is that Russia's strategic direction has changed. Against the background of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, Russia has been subject to tens of thousands of sanctions from the United States and Western countries, especially in the economic field. At this time, Russia gradually shifted its economic center of gravity to the east. In addition, at the previous seven-nation meeting, Western countries unanimously passed the latest round of sanctions against Russia, which led to Russia having to further expand its market in the east. Therefore, Medvedev's visit to Vietnam this time is mainly to discuss economic and trade cooperation with Vietnam, and regional stability is the top priority if he wants to conduct long-term trade cooperation in the South China Sea region. As we all know, the South China Sea region has gradually begun to introduce the power of the United States. The United States and the Philippines even held the largest shoulder military exercise this year, which shows their ambition to expand their influence in the South China Sea region. If we do not establish good relations with South China Sea countries as soon as possible to stabilize the situation in the South China Sea, Russia's trade in this region will inevitably be hindered by the United States and its vassal forces in the future. However, it is obviously unrealistic for Russia to stabilize the situation in the South China Sea on its own, so it will naturally think of joining forces with China. After all, looking at the world, no one wants to stabilize the situation in the South China Sea more than China. Another point is that stabilizing the situation in the South China Sea can also give China a favor. As mentioned earlier, Russia's economic center of gravity has begun to shift eastward, and the largest market in the east is naturally China. In fact, it is precisely because of the continuous cooperation with China in the past 2 years that Russia's economy has not declined too severely. Today, when the situation in the South China Sea is becoming increasingly tense, Russia can inject new strength in maintaining stability, which is of great help to China and also lays a solid foundation for further cooperation between China and Russia in the future. Therefore, whether it is out of consideration for its own economic and trade cooperation, or to fight side by side with China against Western forces, Russia will not stand idly by on the South China Sea issue. At the same time, we also hope that regional countries in the South China Sea can also understand this point. The peace and stability of the South China Sea is beneficial to all countries in the region. The South China Sea issue is a regional country's own problem, and should be resolved by the South China Sea countries themselves, instead of leading wolves into the house and setting themselves on fire. On the South China Sea issue, the Chinese government has been adhering to communication and dialogue to resolve conflicts and disputes. It blindly and secretly confronts, creates conflicts, and engages in an arms race. Such thinking will only push the South China Sea to the brink of conflict step by step. Russia and India are two important countries in Asia. The two countries have profound historical and cultural ties, as well as close economic cooperation. However, in recent years, with the changes in the international situation, some new problems have emerged in the trade between the two countries, the most prominent of which is that Russia holds a large amount of Indian rupees, but it is difficult to spend them, and it may even change into a pile of waste paper. Russia and India are two important countries in Asia. The two countries have HH. It turned out that due to the financial sanctions imposed by the United States on Russia, Russia could not use the US dollar to settle international trade. In order to avoid the risk of sanctions, Russia and India began to discuss the mechanism of using their own currency or a third-party currency to settle bilateral trade in February 2022. In this way, Russia can exchange its oil, natural gas, weapons, and other export products for currencies such as Indian rupees and UAE dirhams. However, this approach did not bring Russia the expected benefits, but put Russia in an embarrassing situation. Because Russia's exports to India far exceed its imports, Russia has formed a huge trade surplus in India. According to data from the Ministry of Commerce and Industry of India, in the first 10 months of 2022 to 2023, from April 2022 to January 2023, Russia's exports to India reached $37.3 billion, mainly oil and gas, while the import volume is only $2.5 billion, mainly chemicals, steel, metal minerals, etc. This means that Russia's trade surplus with India is as high as $34.8 billion, about 2.8 trillion Indian rupees. What is the use of so many Indian rupees for Russia? Theoretically, Russia can use these rupees to buy more goods and services in India, or exchange them into other currencies in the international market, or buy Indian national debt and assets, but in practice, these are not realistic. First of all, it is not so easy for Russia to buy more goods and services in India. Because on the one hand, India itself does not have many high-quality products that can attract Russian demand. Except for some agricultural products, consumer goods, medicines, etc., Russia does not need too many industrial products from India. On the other hand, many Indian companies and banks are reluctant to deal with Russia due to fear of the impact of US sanctions. Even if some companies are willing to export goods to Russia, they will lose profits due to exchange rate fluctuations. Exporters reportedly lose about 4% on each deal. Secondly, it is not so easy for Russia to exchange other currencies in the international market. Because the Indian rupee itself is not a strong currency, not many people are willing to accept it in the international financial market. And because Russia holds too much, if it is sold out at once, it is likely to cause market panic and a sharp drop in the exchange rate. It is reported that some Russian companies have recently privately asked customers whether they can exchange their Indian rupees into other currencies or commodities through a three-party transaction, but it seems difficult to reach a deal. Finally, it is not so easy for Russia to buy India's national debt and assets. Because this idea was actually proposed by India, and it is not in Russia's interests. It is obviously not attractive for Russia to use the cash in its own hands to buy bonds and assets with low yields, high risks, and long-term lock-in maturities, and to bear uncertainties such as exchange rate fluctuations and policy changes. According to reports, in terms of arms and equipment transactions, India once proposed to pay Russia in rupees due to the inability to pay in US dollars, but was rejected by the latter. In short, the use of local currency for settlement of trade with India has not brought expected benefits to Russia. Instead, after the US dollar was excluded, Russia exchanged its own real money for a bunch of currencies that could become waste paper. It is also a warning for China. When conducting trade with other countries, one cannot blindly use local currency settlement or third-party currency settlement, but make a reasonable choice based on one's own interests and market conditions. Otherwise, it may suffer financial risks and losses when the surplus is too large. However, between China and India, as the two largest countries with the most development potential in Asia, the two countries have long had broad cooperation space and complementarity in the field of economics and trade. According to data released by the General Administration of Customs of China, in the first 10 months of 2022 to 2023, China's exports to India increased by 62.7%, while imports increased by 66.1%, and the bilateral trade volume reached $129.98 billion. This shows that the two countries have common interests and needs in terms of economic recovery and supply chain security. In fact, in the past few years, China and India have launched practical cooperation in many fields and achieved positive results. For example, there are good interactions in the fields of agricultural products, medicine, e-commerce, information technology, and new energy. There is also close communication and cooperation under multilateral mechanisms such as the BRICS, the G20, and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. There are also common positions and actions on global issues such as terrorism and anti-poverty. Of course, there are also some contradictions between China and India, especially on the border issue. In June 2020, the armies of the two countries had the most serious conflict since 1962 in the Galwan Valley, which caused many casualties on both sides and triggered strong reactions from the people of the two countries. This conflict has brought huge challenges to Sino-Indian relations, and has also affected the cooperation process between the two countries in other fields. In order to ease the tension, the leaders and foreign ministers of the two countries had several phone conversations, and the two militaries also held several rounds of talks, and finally reached an agreement to withdraw troops from the Pangong Lake area. This is an important step for China-India relations to get out of the trough, and it also creates conditions for further dialogue and communication between the two sides. China-India relations are not simply good or bad, but complex and multi-layered. There is both basic space for cooperation and pressure for competition between the two countries. How to deal with this complexity is a major issue before the two countries. From the perspective of history and reality, there is no fundamental conflict of interest or irreconcilable contradiction between China and India. As long as the two sides adhere to the principles of mutual respect and win-win cooperation, they will be able to find a proper solution to the problem and promote the healthy and stable development of China-India relations.